Alright, so now I might read the full thing, but it's time for the Communist Party Manifesto. Alright, I have never read this. I feel like it's probably a good thing to read. Yeah, maybe interesting. We'll see. It's interesting that it's called the Manifesto of the Communist Party. I thought it was called the Communist Manifesto, but here we go. By Marx and someone else, right? We're at page 31. Right? Marx and Engels. So we'll go back to 30... No, 31. Oh. Alright, Manifesto of the Communist Party. We can do this. Alright, a spectre is haunting Europe. Oh wow, we start off strong, don't we? Alright, a spectre is haunting Europe. The spectre of communism. Wait, what? All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this spectre. Pope, the Tsar, Metternich, and Guizot, French radicals, and German police spies. Alright, so communism was already a thing when they wrote this, eh? Okay. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Oh, so communistic was curse word like from the get-go. I thought that happened after Soviet did a lot of terrible stuff. I thought communistic became a nasty label. Look at that. Seems like it was from the get-go, kinda. Alright. Where is the opposition that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties? The more advanced, eh? As well as against its reactionary adversaries. Yeah, subtle brag. Oh, we're more advanced than these fuckers. Two things result from this fact. Communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. I would assume so, yeah. Number two, it is high time that communists should openly, in the face of the world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the spectre of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. Yeah, if they are vilified, then yeah. Similar to that other manifesto, the Neo-Luddite manifesto that we read recently. Right, instead of just being vilified, be open, show your views. That's rhetorics. To this end, communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in the English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. Published in Danish, eh? Alright. Nice. It starts with an asterisk. The bourgeoisie... Bourgeois... Man, I hate that word. Bourgeois? It's difficult. Not the meaning, just the pronunciation. I'm bad at the pronunciation. Bourgeois. And proletarians. Alright. By bourgeois is... What? Can I click this? A glossary. Alright. By bourgeois is meant the class of modern capitalists, owners of the means of social production and employers of wage labor. By proletariat, the class of modern wage laborers who, having no means of production of their own, are reduced to selling their labor in order to live. Yeah. I mean, here is kind of a... I can see this from where they are at, right? But this is not true today, right? The modern capitalists, I mean, they own factories and whatnot. But I own, like... I am probably one of the capitalists then, yeah. Rather than a proletariat. Yeah, I'm middle class, and middle class is part of the capitalists today. The proletariat are... no, thanks. No means of production of their own. Those people exist. I don't think they exist in my country, but of course people exist that live paycheck to paycheck, just paying for food and shelter, right? That's it, food and shelter. That's the proletariat. Alright, that was a misunderstanding I had. So this is completely true, it's just I'm one of the capitalists today. But it seems like there are probably tiers of capitalists, right? I don't... Like, I own a computer, I own a hammer, I own... Yeah, I own some stuff here and there. So there are more capitalists today, right? That is something that has changed from when this was written. The number of capitalists are growing, I would assume. I mean, the wage gap, like, there's a lot of talk today about the wealth gap growing, and that is the case, right? It's like a meta-capitalist, the people that, like, owns... There are people that own way more stuff, right? But I am still a capitalist from this. That's interesting. I didn't see myself as a capitalist before this definition, but I guess we have to go by this definition. Where is that thing? Ah, here it is. All right. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Alright, let's see what they mean by this. I mean, from one perspective, history is history of class struggles, but I mean, history is such a vague word. It can be the history of ideas, history of philosophy. Like political ideas, like communism is, well, is that class struggles? What about religious history? That's part of society. Like, not everything is about class, but... Alright, let's see what they say. That is all written history. In 1847, the prehistory of society, the social organization existing previous to recorded history, all but unknown. Alright. Since then... Wait. Alright. Since then, August von Haxthausen discovered common ownership of land in Russia. George Ludwig von Maurer provided it to be the social foundation from which all the Teutonic races started in history, and by, village communities were found to be or have been the primitive form of society everywhere from India to Ireland. Village community, is that necessarily a class struggle? I don't think so. I'm not a great historian, but I would assume that a village doesn't necessarily create class. I mean, well, they might create class, but they might not necessarily create class struggles. Maybe, maybe not. Alright. I don't know how old the idea of ownership is. Maybe that is what they're saying, right? Common ownership of land. Everywhere from India to Ireland. The inner organization of this primitive communistic society was laid bare in its typical form by Lewis Henry Morgan's crowning discovery of the true nature of the genes, and its relation to the tribe. With the dissolution of the primeval community, society began to be differentiated into separate and finally antagonistic. Alright, they are saying it's not written history, right? They were talking about urbanization. Urbanization distinguishes into classes. So they're saying that before urbanization, there were not classes like this. Alright, then I understand. That's what confused me, right? I have attempted to retrace this dissolution in the origins of family, private property, and the state. Second edition. Alright. Engels have tried that. Differentiated two separate and finally antagonistic classes. I don't know about antagonistic. I mean, we will see what they mean by antagonistic. I don't think they necessarily have to be antagonistic, antagonizing between the classes. I don't know. Free man and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman. In a word, oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight. A fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large, or in the common ruin of the contending classes. Alright. I'm not so sure. Teacher and learner? Is that oppressor and oppressed? I guess from one point of view you can look at it like that, right? Yeah. The teacher decides. The learner obeys. So I guess you could consider it all oppression. I'm not sure if I want to agree to that, but you can see where they're coming from. Constant opposition, that's just not true though, yeah. Constant opposition, that's not true. I can imagine, and I do imagine, right? Think of... Alright, have you seen The Godfather? The Godfather, the main characters are the lords, right? I don't even remember what they're called. But they got loyalty, right? The guildmaster gets loyalty. The Don Corleone gets loyalty by the serfs. The lord gets loyalty by the serfs. And there is opposition between lordship and lordship. So it's not constant opposition, right? There is... Yeah. I disagree with that. You can get loyalty. The Lord does not want the serfs to suffer. Like, the Lord... I mean, not necessarily, but I can definitely imagine the Lord that wants all this, the wellness of all the serfs. I'm thinking of that show. Recently there was a show that was super popular. I remember seeing it. Downton Abbey. Right? There we had it, right? The bourgeoisie and the proletarians. It was very clear cut in that show. Who was who? But it's also a good example of loyalty between the lords and the serfs, right? Not necessarily opposition all the time. There was opposition, yes, but not constant. But let's focus on the opposition. Opposition and oppression, right? Common ruin of the contending classes, right? Revolutionary reconstitution. Alright, and that I kind of agree. I think revolutionary reconstitution has happened in extreme situations, yeah. People have chopped people's heads off. But it's... Well, it depends on how you look at the language. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, right? Nowadays, and we've talked about in the other texts about the progression, right? Progressive stuff. Small iterative changes. Reconstitution as part of the structure, right? Yeah, having the structure to be improving upon, well, changing itself over and over, right? Instead of a static system. Yeah, I would say that... I mean, maybe you can look at it this way, but I don't know if that's... If this is the cause. I don't know. I don't think this would be the singular cause. I think this would be a contributing factor to revolutionary reconstitution. A contributing factor of the ruin of contending classes, right? I guess that's the ruin of civilizations, right? The Roman Empire, like empires rise and fall. And that this opposition might be part of it. But I don't think it's necessarily this thing that causes it. I'm not a very good study of history, so I'm not the best person to judge that, but that's my thinking anyway. Right. That's my armchair hot take on it. Yeah. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. Yeah. In ancient Rome, we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. Yeah, and I think it's a misguided thing to, again, tear stuff down. I mean, people organize into hierarchies in history. Yeah. That's an efficient way to work, right? You have a top-down system where someone organizes, right? Someone has the organizing role, and that's right. That is from one way, since that is not, well, the decision maker, kind of. Right? And the subordinates. That does not necessarily mean oppression. I mean, it often does, right? Because power corrupts. I don't think that's news to anyone that power corrupts, and the lords, the vassals, the guildmasters, right? They get corrupted from their position. But they don't have to be, right? They can be. What's my point here? Actually, maybe, right? That's the whole idea of democracy, right? It's an old idea. It's about the people making the rules, right? The gradations, the serfs making the rules. It's still a good idea to organize into hierarchical structures because they are useful. It's just that the lords and whatnot don't make the rules. They follow the rules. Right? That's kind of the point of the Buddhists, right? The Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama gets chosen at 7? Something like that. And then they spend their whole lives just teaching the Dalai Lama. What type of leader should you be, right? The Dalai Lama don't make the rules. The rules are made for the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama follow these rules to the best of their ability. Maybe that is the point of communism? Let's see. The modern bourgeois society has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society, has not done away with class antagonisms. It has but established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in places of the old ones. Yeah, alright, right. Sure, I can agree with that. Struggle is always going to be a part of life. I don't know if class struggle will always be a part of life, but I mean, as long as you can have status, which we care about, like we have social, as long as you can have a social standing, there will be people who have higher social standing and lower social standing, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean oppression. It can mean struggle, but not oppression. Right. Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinct feature. It has simplified class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. Is this before the emergence of the middle class? Kind of seems that way, because the middle class is kind of like a bridge between the two, right? Some people in the middle class would be on the political camp of the bourgeoisie, and some would be on the camp of the proletariat. For For example, I see my political views, I see them as inclusive, right? I want the politics to include everybody in society to be a part of. I don't like any type of oppression, but I don't know. Hostile camps. I think that's by the rhetorics of the text creates hostile camps, right? This is the text's doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be hostile camps, right? We can all get along and be friendly. I can see stuff that the bourgeoisie say that makes sense to me. And I can, they can argue for the side of the bourgeoisie. And I can see arguments from the side of the proletariat. That makes sense. And that, I don't even agree that the proletariat necessarily has to agree with the politics of the Communist Manifesto. It's more fluid than that, right? Just like the bourgeoisie might from this definition, right? I am one of the capitalists, one of the bourgeoisie from this definition, but I would spend a lot of time argue politics for the proletariat, so am I hostile towards myself? Am I part of two camps? Am I fighting against the proletariat? I don't see myself as hostile towards the poor, right? That's who we're talking about, right? The poor that don't have anything. I would want to see a society where they have stuff, right? I'm all for universal basic income. Terrible name, by the way. Yeah, everybody, mass production for the masses, where everybody has access to more and more stuff. Yeah, more power. Everyone. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. Burghers. From these burgesses, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. Alright, what is that? It's just people living in a town? Yeah, they are talking about urbanization, yeah. Burg. Wow. I'm pretty sure that etymology comes from Danish or something like that. Danish, Swedish, like the Nordic languages. The boroughs. Yeah, we've got plenty of burgs in Sweden, for example. But I always thought that meant mountain, because in Swedish that's berg is, or berg is a mountain. But we're talking about urbanization, definitely. From these, alright, they were developed. Yeah, right. The more people you have in a location, the more people that are interacting in society, the more need for organizing principles. Right, if you have a village of 100 people that just manage his own business, they do all their food and everything in-house. Do you need a police force? No. that kind of responsibility and organization is a shared responsibility, right? Because everybody knows everybody, right? And they know who did it. If someone breaks the laws, you don't even have to have lawmakers, because it's kind of everybody knows everybody, and it kind of works itself out because everybody knows everybody. They work it out together, right? But then the bigger and more urbanized it becomes, you have a need to organize, right? One could argue that it's moving towards hive mind stuff, right? And the hive mind need a queen. That makes sense? Maybe it doesn't need it. Well, not necessarily, right? The hive mind does not necessarily. Like, we've got we've all seen those, like, birds or fish moving as one, but there is no queen there in that type of hive mind. But we can say, like this text said, that we do it in hierarchies. That's what we do. Humanity, we have done it historically anyway, as far as we remember. Right? Even these villages would have elders or whatnot, right? People you ask for advice. And you have the master and the apprentice, right? Yeah, we teach each other. That's sure oppressive, but well, the learner becomes the teacher, the apprentice becomes the master. I guess that is not the case with the bourgeoisie, and right, that doesn't really work. Well, I suppose. No, it's kind of the same, right? The children takes over the jobs of the parents, but that is becoming more and more fluid. But I guess from this point of view, a bourgeoisie will be a bourgeoisie, and a proletariat will be a proletariat. Not a one-to-one overlap. There is movement back and forth, but not a lot of movement, which I have to concede, yeah. Like the biggest predictor of success, whatever that means, is socioeconomical background, right? Academic success, entrepreneurial success, bourgeoisie success. Yeah, socioeconomical background. It's the biggest predictor. Right. The discovery of America. The rounding of the Cape. Nice. Opened up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and commodities generally gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, an impulse never before known, and thereby to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development. What are we talking about here? Gave what to Kerma? What impulse are we talking about here? The feudal system of industry, in which industrial production was monopolized by closed guilds, now no longer sufficed for growing wants and new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. Alright, yeah. The guild masters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. We are talking about the middle class, eh? Division of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of the division of labor in each single workshop. Yeah, the guilds are no longer really a thing, right? Yeah, now we have companies. Corporates. Corporations, yeah. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon, steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant, modern industry. The place of the industrial middle class by the industrial millionaires, the leaders of the whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeois. Yeah. Why is this a bad thing, right? It kind of... Right? The modern bourgeois is the middle class, right? And if the middle class is growing, isn't that a good thing? Right? Alright, so it seems like I am in agreement somewhat with the communists, right? Because from the communist perspective, I would, like, the future I wish to see upon humanity is the end of what they call the proletariat. The worker. But I would say that the bourgeois are workers as well. Like the middle class are workers in today's society. Yeah, the bourgeois, like... Well, I guess I'm not a worker, but right, most of the middle class are workers. They do jobs to gain capital and money. Or all kinds of stuff, right? The proletariat, it's just food and shelter. Right? If we look at my favorite example here. Where is it? Here we go. My favorite, the needs, right? The proletariat are down here. The middle class is here. Right, maybe here. You get my point, right? The different classes end up... So I think that black and white, bourgeois and proletariat doesn't really work anymore. Even the middle class, right? We talk about upper middle class and lower middle class, right? The classes has been, since this, and maybe even during these times, the black and white distinction is like you have a scale and they have just put their foot down at a place on that scale and said everyone on that side is that and everyone on this side is that. I guess you can do that. It's also a simplified view of reality, I guess. Alright. Modern industry has established the world market, for which the discovery of America paved the way. This market has given an immense development to commerce, navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its turn, reacted on the extension of industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, railway extended, in the same proportion to the bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. That I disagree with. Yeah. I mean, the top of the top, right, skyrocketed, right? And that's the same way today. The billionaires, they are skyrocketing, right, over everyone else. But those were not the bourgeoisie from the definition of this text, right? The middle class. And the middle class is growing as well, right? And I guess there is And I guess the proletariat is shrinking. Right. Slavery is still a thing, but it's becoming less of a thing. Not as extreme as it once was. All those things are changing in the way that I assume the communists want, right? Inclusivity of all people. Something like that? Right. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie in itself is itself the product of a long course of development, a series of revolutions in the modes of production and exchange. Yeah, I agree to that. Sure. That makes sense to me, right? Not only. No, it's not the product. This is one of the reasons for the modern bourgeoisie. It's not. It's kind of like the text defines bourgeoisie and proletariat, and that gives the text the freedom to make it into whatever they wish, even though it is kind of what's the word? Vague, right? The vagueness of the term, right? Who are we talking about? Are we talking about the top 1% or are we talking about the middle class? Is it just because of a long course of development, right? Series of revolutions? I suppose. It's vague enough that I would have to agree, right? I believe in a causal and deterministic reality, and this is like everything is a long series of revolutions, sure, or evolutions, or whatever. Right, each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class. Alright, the modern bourgeoisie are the people that replaced the kings and the queens, the lords and the ladies.
What do you mean, armed? Armed with what? Bad breath, colourful language, feather duster. What do you think?
Deep breath. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Especially thinking that a new kind of social area to inhabit. A powerful one at that. And of course, if it is powerful, they will work for the political advance of, like, all the people inhabiting this class will work for the political advancement of that class, or what they believe will be political advancement for their class, right? Just like a lot of my political views, right? They are based on what I think would be good for me. Just like your political views are based on what you think are good for you. But I would have to point out as well that proletariat is shrinking. Middle class is growing. Percentage-wise, yeah. An oppressed class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self-governing association in the medieval commune. What is this? All right. This was the name given to their urban communities by the townsmen of Italy and France after they had purchased or conquered their initial rights of self-government from their feudal lords. Commune was the name taken in France by the nascent towns even before they had conquered from their feudal lords and masters local self-government and political rights to the third estate, as the third estate. Generally speaking, for the economical development of the bourgeoisie, England is here taken as the typical country for its political development. I thought France was, right? Here, independent urban republic, as in Italy and Germany, their taxable third estate of the monarchy, as in France. Afterwards, in the period of manufacturing proper, serving either the semi-feudal or the absolute monarchy as counterpoise against the nobility, and in fact cornerstone of the great monarchies in general. The bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of modern industry and of the world market, conquered for itself in the modern representative state exclusive political sway. Oh man, long sentences. Exclusive political sway. Yes, that is what happens, right? There are some exclusivity to political sway, sure. But it's still, right? It's still more people included in political swayness, right? The modern bourgeoisie, that it's a bigger group of people than it was before, the kings and the lords and the whatnot, right? It includes more people into the political discourse. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. Sure, it's a hierarchy on top of the hierarchy, right? If the bourgeoisie are the organizers of the urbanized cities, then the state is an organizing factor over the bourgeoisie, right? The bourgeoisie historically has played a most revolutionary part, right? The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexuses between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. That's a bleak view. Naked self-interest. And necessarily thinking that naked self-interest is something terrible. Like, it kind of, right? It calls this callous, right? Naked self-interest is like, what do I want? I want a stable society. Is that a bad thing? Is that callous? I want an inclusive society. Out of self-interest. Yeah. I mean, I would say it's definitely preferable to natural superiors. But it has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in an icy water of egotistical calculation. I think this is bordering on straw man-y. It's mass production, right? Mass production. Production for the masses. Right. Sure, maybe it is egotistical calculation, but it's still... They don't want, like... This supposed opposition between the classes is not necessarily there. Right? We've got modern, super modern bourgeoisie, like the top 1%. A lot of those people, like the people in the public eye, I mean, they suck from one point of view, but on the other hand, take Elon Musk, right? He's treating all his, maybe not all, but his proletariat, whatever that is, he's treating them like shit, or so I hear. But at the same time, trying to solve global problems, right, for the environment. Right? They have, right, they're trying to make, from their point of view, the world a better place. Right? Top 1%. Same with all these billionaires, right? Maybe not all of them, but some of them might just be egotistical, narcissistic psychopaths. But even egotistical, narcissistic psychopaths have ideas what they want the world to look like, right? And from their point of view, right, they're not all of them, but some of them are trying to make the world a better place from their point. Yeah, so, right. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in its place of the numberless indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single unconscionable freedom: free trade. In one word, for exploitation veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substitute naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. All right. Yeah, from the communist point of view, from the other side, it looks like this, right? Right, it looks like this from the, if you're on the proletariat side of this coin, that is what it looks like, right? From the bourgeoisie point of view, it doesn't look like this. Yeah, this is not what it looks like for them. The free trade, the people who like free trade, it doesn't look like naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. It's them, it's like free trade. It's freedom for all the people. That's what it looks like to them, right? So, I think this feeling and being at the shitty end of this social structure, being part of the proletariat, that sucks. And definitely these voices should be heard. The Communist Manifesto, good idea. But I think the hostility and the... What was it called again? Where are we at? Constant opposition. This text has made up. Yeah, it's from this point of view, and they buy this text, right? This text, as far as I am understanding it, is creating a hostility that need not be here. Right? Politics is about cooperation, right? Democracy is about cooperation and building these things, right? Right. It kind of, yeah, there's a lot of talk today about the polarization. And the text, as this text looks, it widens the gap, right? Like from this text point of view, right, we've got the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, right? And it widens the gap. And it leads to hostility, right? If we're here, we're after here, right? And just, I think to achieve the goals of inclusivity and raising the proletariat up, that takes all of us, right? So just rejecting the view, like completely rejecting their point of view is rude. I think it's rude against the bourgeoisie. I think we could include the bourgeoisie in the discourse. Yeah. Right, the bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. Sure, and I think if that's the case, that is a good thing. Yeah, because I think I'm taking this as work, right? And I think that looking at work as awe, with reverent awe, is dumb. Right? If we don't have to do the work, why should we, right? Oh, they're taking our jobs. Fuck that. Right? People just want access to the fruits of the labor, right? The labor itself is not what people want. It is the fruits of the labor that people want, right? That's the case. Isn't that always the case? For everyone, right? If you got to choose... Alright. You have... Everything looks exactly the way it does today, right? Your free time. You have the same amount of money. You have the same home. You have the same food. All the stuff that you have today looks the same, except for you having a job or not having a job. Having to go to job. Actually, let's put it like this. You have to go to your job by 8 hours 5 days a week or 8 hours 4 days a week. That's the only change. Nothing else changes. Nothing else. Which one would you pick? I am convinced that a majority picks the 4 days. Not everybody, of course. But let's change that example up a little bit then, right? Let's say that you can choose to go 4 days and 5 days, but you get the same amount of pay. That you don't get paid for the 5th day. Some people would still, right, go when they did not get paid. And my argument then is that if you go and you don't get paid and you still go and do it, then it's not work. Then it's a hobby. Hobby? Yeah. Rather than work. And then I end up with 100% win rate with my argument, what I decided, which is, I kind of want to hear a counter argument to that. I've told it to a lot of people that view on work. Still haven't heard any good counter arguments to it, but I would want to see some. I'm not the best person to come up with them, right? Alright, it has converted the physician, the lawyers, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wage laborers. Yeah. If I could get my health from a machine with the same quality as with a person, then politically, then yeah, the machine is the better choice. The laborers, I mean, I would say that this is kind of weird. This kind of weirds me out, because these are the bourgeoisie, right? Aren't they? These are the capitalists, not the wage laborers. They have the means of the services that they provide, right? They create a service for, I don't know. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. That's... I completely disagree with this, yeah. I mean, the physician that gets a wage, gets paid for their work, I value them. I value them even if they don't get paid for their work, right? Do people have to identify as these things? Is that the argument? In the Communist Manifesto that the people who can do that, I don't know. Right? Sentimental veil, right? Family relations. That's between me and my family. That's not between me and some vague abstract person that I don't know that owns some capital, right? My sentimentality through my family comes from my family. It does not come from the bourgeoisie, and I think it's kind of rude that, like, this person, that the text assumes that the bourgeoisie has that power to decide what the sentimental veil should look like and what it is. Just like the text itself, it assumes that the bourgeoisie has that control, which is actually the text itself assuming that it knows what my family should look like, what it looks like and what it should look like. And I would say to the author of this text, if I understand this correctly, stay the fuck out from my family structure. Who are you to decide what my family looks like? It's definitely not a mere money relation. That's definitely not it. And even if that was it, who are you to decide what it should look like? What gives you the authority? What gives this text any authority to speak on this? Yeah, this was rude. Fuck that. Right, the bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionaries so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptians' pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that are put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. don't quite understand here. This is very vague. Like, these things does not come all from capitalism, right? It comes from the Enlightenment and whatnot, right? It comes from a new way of looking at the world, which is not about money. It's a scientific and critical viewpoint has done a lot of these things, right? Knowledge. Here we go. Knowledge. Modern knowledge has helped us create these things. Whatever that knowledge is. Maybe it is knowledge about the capitalistic system as part of it, sure. But it's also knowledge about the world that we live in and how it works. Right, the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production and thereby the relations of production and with them the whole relations of society. Oh wow, here we come. Look at that. So nobody wants technological advancement, eh? Not people on the far right, not people on the far left. They all say that technological advancement, progress, oh no, we cannot have that. Right. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty, and agitation. Is that like aggression? Similar to? Agitate? Agitation. There we go. Distinguish the bourgeoisie epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real condition of life and his relations with his kind. Real? Alright. This is kind of weird, because for me, like, these examples... Right? A lot of this I see as positive aspects of society. Is this meant to be used as an argument against bourgeoisie functioning? Or are they just talking about the future revolution? That's why, yeah, communists love that word, right? Revolution. So maybe the... Right, this like, with sober senses to his real condition of life. I mean, that's... We have new ideas and new ways of looking at life, but it doesn't make it necessarily real. It's more interesting. I prefer the modern ways to view life rather than the old religious, holy ways. Right. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. Yeah, working towards a hive mind, right? I don't know if I agree that this is a must or a definite consequence of bourgeoisie capitalism. I mean, they just say, right? It must. Why must it? I don't understand why it must. I mean, it has done, so it must have. But, and also, what is the relevancy of this? Right, the bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry to the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries, whose introduction became a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. Yeah, mass production, production for the masses, right? We create tools for the proletariat. No? In place of the old wants satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants requiring for the satisfaction of the productions of distant lands and climates. This is actually very interesting. This argument is this old. Climate change. Right? This is climate change arguments, right? Just before they were cool. That's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting that early. And climate change nowadays is a problem, right? I would argue that climate change is not necessarily in itself a terrible thing. It is a bad thing when it disrupts stuff that we need for quality life for humanity. Right, global warming, for example, is not a good thing. What other climate change could we consider a good thing for humans? Right. At the moment, we're getting more storms and whatnot. What if we get a more structured climate, right? More routine, less climate from a human-centric view can be good or bad, right? And we can change it towards the good, or we can change it towards the bad. And like if we're talking about consumerism, which it is, right? It's talking about a consumeristic attitude. And I don't necessarily agree that capitalism has to be married to a consumeristic attitude. Maybe it has to be, right? I don't know, but let's assume we're talking about consumerism anyway. Consumerism tends to do this. Yeah, just take everything, give nothing back. That's kind of a consumeristic attitude, yeah. And they had the idea even back here that that is not good for the climate, for the lands, for the people. And that knowledge becomes more and more prevalent with every year. That it's not really good for us, the consumeristic attitudes. addicted to consuming. Yeah. All right. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. Yeah, that's the problem with centralization, right? And I'm all for decentralization where possible. But it's not... that ship has sailed. Sometimes centralization... for some questions, like global warming, it has to be a global effort, right? Because if we decentralize, everybody's gonna start burning more coal. If we decentralize more... right. And as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. Intellectual property. Gross. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures there arise a world literature. I'm curious about that. Are we still moving that way? More and more people are speaking English, right? To stretch my arms a little bit.
It's down there somewhere. Let me take another look.
I think it's great that knowledge spreads and becomes more and more widespread. Yeah. Accessible. Let's call it that. Accessible. Because knowledge, right? What I know and you know might differ like a lot. Right? What I know, you might consider false. Fake news, my knowledge, your knowledge might be, in my mind, fake news. Stuff like that, right? So, accessible knowledge. I think that the knowledge that I have should be accessible to you, and the knowledge that you have should be accessible to me. There should be no proprietary stuff, right? It should be, yeah, common property, if that is the word you want to use. I don't want to use that word. Just common knowledge. Common access to knowledge. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations, into civilization. The cheap prices of commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls. Oh wow. Are they seriously calling the Chinese barbarous? That's very interesting. They had a way older culture, like when this happened, right? The Chinese culture is way older than the new bourgeoisie one, right? Not barbaric. Well, some parts we would consider barbaric, yeah. The Chinese in this, like, this heavy artillery would be considered barbaric from the Chinese point of view, right? Maybe. Right. With which it forces the barbarians' intensely obstinate hatred of foreign to capitulate. It compels all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt a bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst. That is, to become bourgeoisie themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. That's interesting, though. Because that is kind of happening, right? That kind of implies to me that since all nations feel compelled to do this, especially on pain of extinction, I don't know about that, but since all nations feel compelled to bring into this way, right, all humans join in, that is where we're going, right, isn't it? Computers are too useful, and computers are now everywhere, and we're gonna have more and more computers, right? Because that is the preference of our species. That is the preference. Right? It doesn't matter your politics, your worldviews, whatever. Humans, we capitulate to these modern, new, rapid improvement ideas because we value them. Right? If humans did not value all these benefits, then we wouldn't. I mean, partly it happens by gunpoint because, well, guns give us power, right? I have the power to tell you what to do, and I would say it's bigger than just a socio-political thing. I would think it's a species thing, like a species, not a revolution, but evolution, right? It's a species evolution. As long as we don't fucking screw up with the nature and whatnot, and humanity just fucks up royally, and like most of us die, most of future humanity dies, as long as that doesn't happen, just power will keep on growing, right? Stuff that we do today would seem like magic just 100 years past, right? Stuff in 100 years future would seem like magic from the world of today, right? Maybe the future of humanity is becoming godlike. Is that such a bad thing if every human becomes godlike of a universe of their own? Right? The idea of the Matrix might be a utopia. Right? Maybe we'll escape from this reality into another one of our own making. And we become like gods in that reality instead. Because we created it after what we want. It's just speculation, but maybe that's a future. Alright, the bourgeoisie has subjected the country to the rule of the towns. It has created enormous cities, which has greatly increased the urban population as compared with the rural, and has thus rescued a considerable part of the population from the idiocy of rural life. Rescued and idiocy, that's kind of rude, right? There's probably some wisdom in rural life. I mean, and as they said, right, it was at gunpoint, so I don't know, rescued. Just that it has made the country dependent on towns, so it has made barbarian and semi-barbarian countries dependent on civilized ones. It's kind of the other way around, isn't it? The civilized ones are dependent on the, right? The bourgeoisie are dependent on the proletariats, right? And if you create, I don't know, nations of peasants on nations of bourgeoisie, the East on the West. Maybe. Yeah, but in the Eastern countries, right? The middle class is growing. The proletariat nowadays in China is shrinking, right? Same trend. The bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of the population, of the means of production and property. It has agglomerated population, centralized the means of production, and concentrated property in a few hands. I'm not so sure about that. Yeah, there is a big difference, and there probably was, but it is doing mass production still. It's production for the masses. That is what happens. Sure, it's an unfair, it's skewed in a certain way that I don't like necessarily, but it's still, right? It's not all bad. It's not only, like, it's concentrating a lot of property in a few hands, but also the many hands gets more property as well, right? It is not happening like this. It is happening like this. I don't know if that shows up, right? We have two here. If we start out here, this one increases up here, this one increases up here. It's not that this one increases and this one gets pushed down. I guess this, and I mean, it goes up and down, of course, but the general trend is that everything grows, right? Right. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent but loosely connected provinces with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation becomes lumped together into one nation, with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. I wonder. It's imperialism, right? But imperialism has been a thing for a long time. Right? That's not a new idea. The Roman Empire, they wanted to take over the world, right? Empires has risen and fallen, and they has always, like, they want to centralize political stuff, right? And I see value in both, right? Some politics is a good idea to centralize. Others, the focus should be more decentralized. From my opinions, anyway. Right? Like murder. We can probably centralize that. Not necessarily fully globally. But in most places of the world, there is a general consensus that in general don't want murder, right? That's the general consensus. So in most parts of the world, we can centralize that rule. That no murdering. No violence against the other citizens. Let's put it that way. Don't do violence against the other citizens. Right, that could be global laws. We don't have to have global governments for that, right? We don't need a global police force, for example. You can have a local police force. Yeah, local police force makes more sense, especially, right, if you can localize it so that you know the police force that is part of policing where you live, right? That is probably beneficial, right? That the police gets to know, like, they one cop for 100 people, and that, well, no, even more than that. 500 people, 1,000 people, right? The cop doesn't necessarily need to know every individual, but all those individuals can know the cop. Right, whatever that number limit is. So we can have the same laws, but not the same enforcement of those laws. And that is kind of what it looks like, right? But I would agree with it being a problem that it's It's too much focus on centralizing stuff that doesn't really need to be centralized. Like I want to see a decentralized internet, for example. More decentralization would be good for the internet. Because the more centralized it is, the easier it is to break. Right? It's like if it's super centralized, then it has a single point of failure. So actually, maybe the laws don't have to be centralized. The governments don't have to be centralized because, right, yeah, the problem is, like with murder, is that if you murder some person and then leave, right, there's a lot of movement in modern society. Like you murder someone and then leave, then you just get away with it, right? You just go to the neighboring town. So there is reason for cooperation. Yeah, cooperation and not centralization. But then there are like scientific discovery and medical advancements. It is good to have many scientists do the same thing, but it is also, right, if the goal is to increase knowledge, and I think it is, then a global discussion between all scientists, right? Crowdsource. Right, the bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. Has it? Maybe. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industrial agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. But earlier century had even had a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor. Right. Seems like magic, yeah. We see then the means of production and exchange on whose foundation the bourgeoisie built itself up were generated in feudal society. At a certain stage in the development of these means of production and exchange, the conditions under which feudal society produced and exchanged the feudal organization of agriculture and manufacturing industry, in one word, the sentence just goes on and on. The feudal relations of property became no longer compatible with already deployed productive forces. They became so many fetters, and they had to be burst asunder. They were burst asunder. I didn't get this bit. Into their place stepped free competition, accompanied by a social and political constitution adapted in it, and the economic and political sway of the bourgeoisie class. I'm not so sure I understand what they mean here. Right? It was birthed in a feudal society, and then it birthed a bourgeoisie one. And I just want to... It's interesting. The Communist Manifesto, it's lifting this all up a lot, right? I don't know how they had to burst asunder. I don't know what it alludes to, what they're talking about. But Alright, feudal relations of property became no longer compatible. Alright, property based on who you are and who your parents were was broken asunder, and now instead is based on how much money you have, right? Right, it switched, so it was burst asunder. It was burst asunder and free competition, right? That anyone can own anything. That I think if that is in fact, yeah, that in that interpretation, I get it. Yeah. Right? The Lord and the kings were the owners, God-given owners of whatnot, right? That was the property. The vassals of the land and whatnot. But this whole new idea and chains of production and mass production stuff, they couldn't really deal with it. It didn't work anymore. So instead we organized by merit. I mean, that's the idea anyway. By whoever did the good job and had the money and had the means to fix this, to do the mass production, they did the mass production. But it's kind of, it's not a complete replacement, right? It's not a complete revolution, right? Since the vassals, they still were the owners, right? They didn't suddenly just get super poor. No, they just, right? If you take, I would assume like most of the rich people today, like the super rich, well, well, it would not, actually, let's flip that around. It would not surprise me if the descendants of the lords and the ladies and the vassals and the whatnot, all of those, still are very well off and would be definitely considered to be bourgeois today. Yeah, that would not surprise me one bit if that is the case for most of them. Like, a lot of them probably fell from grace, but most probably have it just fine. So it wasn't like burst asunder is a bit extreme, I think. But I get their point. That's from my understanding anyway. All right, and that is lunchtime. Actually, I am enjoying this. How far did we get? Like 5-6 pages? Yeah, that's gonna be fine then. It's just gonna take like a week or 2 weeks to read this thing, maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It's gonna be fine. Yeah, enjoyable indeed. All right, so thanks for hanging out, and yeah, have a good one, and see you next time. Cheers.